I'm Ralph Schmidt. I was the faculty advisor this summer for the study on Orient Beach State Park, and our client was the New York State Department of Parks and Historic Preservation. And we are very happy to have the commissioner here this evening, Rose Harvey, to take in the presentation. And also let me welcome Dean Cohen and Assistant Dean Sarah Nicolo. So without further ado, I will, we had a really great group. It was a fantastic experience for me, and I would like to ask the students in the group to please stand up just for a minute so we'll see what our group looks like. Forever young, as Bob tells us. And Marissa Fresquez is our presenter this evening, so I will turn it over to her. Thank you, Marissa. And thank you all for coming.
My name is Marissa Fresquez. I'm the Deputy Project Manager for the Capstone this summer, and I'm excited to tell you about the findings for our project titled Enhancing Climate Resilience in Long Island State Parks. Orient Beach State Park was our case study. And the four main objectives for this investigation were to research climate change, sea level rise, and storm projections, study the existing wildlife, aquaculture, and natural infrastructure, identify and characterize risks, evaluate potential opportunities to develop ecosystem-based approach for climate resiliency. The key park features we identified were its function as physical protection for the village of Orient and its surrounding area from waves, storm surge, and extreme weather events, natural response to flooding, storms, and coastal erosion, the Causeway, and the red cedar forest, and studying the wildlife to understand the implications if resilience measures were not implemented. Ultimately, Orient Beach State Park serves as a case study to drive resilience planning along New York coastal parks, Long Island, and similarly vulnerable areas. Today we'll be covering these agenda items. Now that you know the task at hand, let's get to know the park itself. Orient Beach State Park is a 4-mile peninsula consisting of 360 acres, located as far east as you can go on the North Fork of Long Island. The park opened in 1934 and is situated between farming communities in North Fork. It serves roughly 350,000 visitors per year and attracts naturists, birdwatchers, beachgoers, families, bikers, and runners. Of the 190 acres surveyed by the New York Parks Department, about 40% consists of maritime forest, 22% salt marsh, and 37% beach. So I'll take a minute. Here's the maritime forest with red cedars, salt marsh is here, shrub, and then here's some also physical infrastructure. This is the little kiosk that takes money when you first drive in, and there's the Causeway, we'll talk a lot about that, and here are some other features. Here are some post-Sandy historical photos shared with us by Sue Miller, the park ranger stationed at Orient Beach for the last 15 years. The photo on the left shows extreme flooding and inundation of the red cedar forest in the background. The photo on the right shows the erosion from the Causeway, which was rebuilt, repaired, and repaved several times since the park's opening. After speaking with Tim Morin of the National Weather Service, who has been covering weather for Long Island for decades, he made it very clear that Orient is vulnerable not just to climate change, sea level rise, and major storms. It also is subject to all 4 seasons, winter storms, blizzards, hurricanes, tropical storms, tornadoes, fire, and phragmity risks. Actually, the day that we interviewed him, he was talking about having to wrap up the call early because of a summer version of nor'easter, and then about a week later we got a tornado warning. So very telling of how extreme the weather can be. Furthermore, Superstorm Sandy weakened the already vulnerable coastline and sped up the coastal erosion. As sea levels continue to rise, the storms increase in frequency and intensity, dramatic alterations to coastal landscape widens the flood-prone footprint, placing more buildings and infrastructure at risk. As seen in these photos, the far left shows loss of beach on Long Island. The center shows storm damage to piers from a boardwalk, and the far right shows the wave crashing against Robert Moses State Park on the southern side of the peninsula and calm waters on the northern side. With the rise in sea levels, the park could see permanent inundation to the low-lying regions, altering the coastline and weakening the defense by habitats that naturally protect and defend the coast. Here are the natural systems in Orient Beach. The salt marsh, maritime forest, and eelgrass beds alike provide ecosystem value for controlling erosion, protecting coasts, and providing habitat for rare species, including economic value of nearby aquaculture. For example, eelgrass in the area has seen a 90% loss since the 1930s, mostly due to rising water temperature, harmful algal blooms, and water pollution. The main threats to all are water quality-related issues, invasive species, and sea level rise. In other areas nearby, dredging and development are also factors. In accordance with the studies performed by the Cornell Cooperative Extension, the eelgrass expert we interviewed humorously said that eelgrass is hard to root for, meaning that it's hard to get the average person behind a restoration project if it doesn't have a cute and fuzzy animal behind it. That might be true, so the next part of the biodiversity section shows some species which are a little more inspiring. There's an abundance of aquatic systems and avian species on Orient Beach. A 2016 species richness report found over 50 breeding species of birds, amongst them the federally threatened piping plover, that cute little guy, and the New York State threatened least tern. The Audubon Society has declared the peninsula as an important birdwatching area. Both species are regularly monitored, as well as other birds and terrapins by nonprofits and naturists. Continued monitoring and data collection is important. All species on Orient Beach State Park face the same major challenges due to land loss and degradation. For shellfish, this is a particularly grave consequence. We are focusing on the park's surrounding area, as seen on the New York State shellfish harvesting map behind me. The main types of shellfish harvested are clams, oysters, mussels, bay scallops, and whelk. P5G, which is highlighted for you here, yields about 8% of all bay scallops and 14% of all oysters commercially harvested. Combined, this area behind the park serves as economic stimulus for the region, creating jobs while generating nearly $1 million wholesale in 2017. Similarly, these ecosystems are interconnected and tied to the health of the park. Though it is not a commercial fishery, the ecosystem services provided are vital to the shellfish health in the surrounding area. Peconic bay scallops, their preferred habitat is eelgrass. Scallop harvests have seen a major decline over the years, mainly due to agricultural activities from the Peconic Bay. Fortunately, populations have rebounded, in part because of restoration efforts by the Cornell Cooperative Extension. Oysters are the most lucrative and productive shellfish business in the area. During our research, we discovered that an oyster farm behind the park was shut down for 6 months because of water quality issues. We believe that local business interests would be invested in more restoration projects. In addition to the obvious fiscal benefits from the park, we must also recognize the added value the park creates for recreation, tourism, and building community. Sue told us several stories of locals volunteering to build osprey nests, plant trees, and participate in beach cleanups. Here's a quote from Rose Harvey, park commissioner, who's actually here today, where New Yorkers of all ages and backgrounds come together for fun and friendship, learning and healing, to experience New York's great outdoors and history, and build mind and muscle. This was an address in the joint budget hearing of the state legislature, and it further demonstrates the value of bringing people outdoors. When calculating the risk of losing such an important facility, we needed to define the elements and quantify them. The value of each, probability of an event occurring, low, medium, high, and magnitude of risk in dollars were two elements that we used. Not only are we defining and evaluating each value of risk, we know based on our research that climate change projections will slide the scales and be pushed to the extremes. Here are some maps we developed based on the Department of State Coastal Risk Model and the Long Island Coastal Vulnerability Assessment. Here's 2020 and here's 2100. As you can see, there's a huge loss of 1.5 feet in the next 30 years, 1.3 feet, and from 20 to 2100, 2.42 feet. It gets skinnier and skinnier. As the peninsula is being flooded and inundated by rising sea levels, it will also be exposed to more frequent storms. Based on the Department of State risk models and Long Island Coastal Vulnerability Assessment, it's expected there will be 2 100-year storms and 1 500-year storm before 2050. For reference, Superstorm Sandy was a 260-year event. We have three options for ecosystem-based adaptation management and coastal resilience. On one side of the extreme, retreat is a strategy to abandon threatened land and halt future development. The middle ground approach is adaptation, changing actions to suit current conditions. One example of adaptation that the park staff implemented was to remodel the office and elevate the outlets from future seasonal flooding. On the other extreme, retreat would be to leave it behind entirely. But let's face it, there's nowhere else to go. We adopted a hybrid between adapt and defend. The case study for Orient Beach State Park reveals overwhelming vulnerability of the park's physical facilities and infrastructure. Similar to how we quantify risk, we can also use the same metrics for evaluating the likelihood of cost effectiveness of floodproofing projects. Keeping that in mind, we propose the following ecosystem-based adaptation recommendations. We are proposing a menu of different options and considering the metrics of risks and cost effectiveness of each of the projects. The Parks Department can evaluate which adaptations strategies to pursue. We believe the best solution is a hybrid of several or all of the solutions. Number one, develop a coastal resilience plan. This plan has three objectives: to protect the beach from erosion, protect and reinforce natural infrastructure, including the wetlands and marine forest, and ensure sediment replenishment and retention. By creating conditions that alleviate red cedars from the saltwater floods, we hope to restore the marine forest. Through the process of beach reclamation and the construction of vegetated dunes, the distance between the forest and the ocean should increase, creating a raised topography that will encourage quick drainage. Number two, establish better data collection and protocol. We recommend that the park develops protocol and restoration plans for dealing with the impact of storm damage of various categories. Coastal protection professionals should train staff and volunteers in best practices for developing these protocols. This will also include the development of recovery and response programs. The Causeway is the only access to the park. The park spent $2.5 million from 2002 to 2012 repairing it due to different storms. We have two options. We can preserve or abandon. Unfortunately, for the preserve side of the equation, the solutions and technology available for preserving, they are permanent, they are costly, but do not guarantee protection from major storm events. And I just want to point out, here is breakwaters. It slows down wave energy. This is wave attenuation and attenuators, and this is a seawall. If we were to abandon, we'd have to build a bridge here by Eagle's Neck here, and it would have to be accessible, or if we didn't build that, we would have to have a ferry dock landing. Preservation of facilities. Rather than trying to defend the entire peninsula, the park could also look at strategies to preserve the buildings. Inexpensive solutions such as building a flood wall around the park office and other critical facilities could be an option. We also considered the park's electrical supply. Considering the park's access to southern solar exposure, we've recommended a microgrid PV storage system that could function as an off-grid solution for providing electrical supply to the park. We've calculated a 10-year payback for a system designed to offset the same demand that the park would use. We believe there are significant opportunities with community engagement and educational programs to bolster further support. For example, the Group for the East End will be kicking off their partnership with the park to educate the community about the conservation of habitat. The Audubon Society and the Nature Conservancy could also be others. The park's financial position for capital appropriations is weak. They receive approximately $90 million distributed to 180 parks. They do not have a multi-year capital plan, which would be useful for advocacy for additional funds. Therefore, we've identified the following alternative funding sources and grants that the park could be eligible for. The integration of sustainability is critical to enhance resiliency for coastal parks in New York State. Fundamentally, the park must develop a management plan, maintain a multi-year capital plan, and improve data collection and monitoring of operational and response initiatives to determine a baseline and a true path forward. In doing so, we enable state parks to better adapt to climate change in one of the most beautiful coastal parks while practicing adaptation methods that can be implemented in similar parks. Thank you. I'll take any questions if anybody has any. Does someone want to see the piping plover again? That makes everybody happy. Yes, hi.
Can you talk a little bit about the timing of the implementation of these recommendations?
So there are a menu of options, as we said. Some of them can be implemented tomorrow. Some of them have longer lead times because of the designs associated, in terms of what to do with the causeway, for instance. It's also all very, very costly. So in terms of getting the funding for it, that would probably take the longest. The Coastal Resilience Plan is the natural infrastructure response. So it's building up the dunes and the coastlines to better protect and defend.
Right, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is that climate impacts will manifest in varying severity over a long period of time.
Right.
And the park does have very little money to spend on this. So did you study, when certain things needed to happen? I understand that some things could happen now and some things could happen a few years from now. But for the park to plan, it would need to understand how long it could wait.
Okay, the timeliness.
Before taking, certain costly steps.
We did look at that. We are still finalizing the report, to be honest. But yes, that's definitely a factor. And I think for right now, it seems like showing the importance of the park as a vital part of the community would make more people be aware of it. And as we said, this is a case study for all of Long Island, so all these parks could actually potentially be implementing these sorts of solutions. We did learn, I think, through the class in the beginning, a lot about how beaches and coasts behave when large storms or climate change hit them. So every beach and every park is going to respond differently. We are developing, though, based on the risks that we evaluated and the recommendations, we have evaluated where, like on the spectrum, in terms of low, high cost and effectiveness. That was part of the, after the risk slide, the adaptation strategies part, because there's definitely projects that could have a lot more of an impact and help to defend much better. It's just a matter of when the storm hits or when a really bad, seasonal flooding event occurs. Yes.
Is the park itself completely natural? Was any of that landfill that was brought in or sand that was brought in? I think like Jones Beach was completely artificial.
The question was, I forgot to repeat the first one, but the question was if any of the park was landfill, if it was all natural. Right. To my understanding, it was all natural.
So does this play a role in protecting the mainland of
Yes, absolutely. In Long Island?
Yeah, the rest of I'm looking at what... the area inside there.
Exactly.
And do people live inside that area?
Yes, they do. So the village of Orient is directly behind, and it does provide a physical barrier to slow down wave energy and to slow down the storm surges.
People who live in those communities have an interest in this barrier remaining intact.
Yes, they definitely have an interest.
So there might be some potential for political and revenue support coming from those people.
Exactly. I think also we were trying to go for the economic route as well to get folks that have long-time oyster farms and restaurants that rely on the shellfish there as well. But definitely getting bolstering support throughout the community. They all have an interest in it. And part of our research also was learning about how Long Island is becoming the place to be now, and real estate is going up. So the further you push it out, the more people are being there. But when we took our site visit there, we saw that it's mostly like farms and very spaced apart and a lot of open space. So yes.
I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. We actually do have a multi-year plan, but unfortunately Orient is not in it because there's so much that has to be done over the rest of the 215 parks and historic sites. So you're right. There's very little money, but to your question earlier about the timing, when we know what we want to do, then as we go forward for the next 5 years, maybe Orient will be in it. And as well, the Department of Transportation actually owns that causeway. So they are very nicely trying to give it to us, but we're not paying it. So with the causeway, what was your suggestion with the causeway? We're well aware it's beyond the park's capital budget, not beyond DOT's budget, but what were you thinking as the three alternatives a little more specifically?
So if we were to, if a major storm event occurred and the causeway went away, that is where we would entertain the bridge option there through Eagle's Neck. This little line here.
Let the causeway go.
Let the causeway go, because they've repaired it, repaved it so many times. How many millions of dollars was it over 10 years to 2.5 million
Right.
over the 10 years to repair it. So the option would be to build a bridge, and I don't know who would build that. Maybe the DOT will pay for that, probably not though. Or we let it go, and it's now an island to visit, and you get there by ferry.
Good. And what about the notion of letting the causeway go and just have bicycles and pedestrian until it goes?
That's an awesome-
Or converting that into a pedestrian bicycle.
That is a really, I don't think we considered that, to be honest. Because the electrical supply is under the causeway, that would be a concern. So if it's just enough for like a bike lane, that would be great, because then it would encourage less CO2. But the concern there would probably be, is the electrical supply okay, being buried under there and letting it go? But that's a great recommendation.
And then you mentioned there's a oyster farm or behind in the bay, which is great.
Yes.
We were not aware of that, or I wasn't aware of that.
So Amanda's our oyster expert, but I am supposed to be the one that answers the question. So through the research and through the interviews, we found that there were some water quality issues, and there's an oyster farm nearby that was shut down for 6 months because of water quality issues. And my understanding was it was fecal matter from birds.
Wow.
Yes.
So it wasn't flushing, right.
Yes, exactly. So, and that kind of like further demonstrates how the water's not able to self-regulate and clean itself with the eelgrass being in such decline. 90% decline since 1930. So.
And one final, which goes, Dean, to your comment, is that we've been thinking about our parks as the first defense for the built environment. We own 150 miles just on Long Island, and so to whatever we do, this beach park, it will have a huge influence as a barrier and wave attenuator for the mainland, so to speak. And so to build that up and it is important for the mainland, and I think we could get the rest of the community to understand that and help us do that.
Definitely. Thank you.
You mentioned commercial fishing, largely dwelling on the oysters, but Long Island is the host to innumerable recreational fishermen. I'm one. And it is a very committed group to the preservation of good fishing grounds. And I didn't have my rod with me, but I certainly wished I had. Because it looks like it's a very productive recreational fishing area, and if you galvanize that community, I suspect that you could pull together some political support for its ongoing maintenance.
I think you're absolutely right. I think what we had trouble doing was placing a value on what a fisherman gets from doing that. We probably should have interviewed you actually to ask you how much you would pay to help save this state park, but because it's a part of this network of different areas and fishery locations, it's kind of hard to say like, oh, well, pay X amount to try to like support this, but I guess if we did an approach where it was all of Long Island, I think that would probably be a little more impactful.
If you like fish, I guess you'd pay in fish.
Oh, there you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, you pay for a license
Right.
in many states. In New York, you don't. For a few years, New York tried to make people pay for a fishing license, a saltwater fishing license, and it didn't work. But, that might be implemented locally. Or there are also any number of advocacy groups for the Long Island fishery that I think you could have them focus on this particularly weak point along the coast and good fishing ground and get their support.
That's a great idea. Thank you for writing that down.
Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you.